So welcome to session number 1. Now first up we have Tony Fitzpatrick, who's the founder of BIMcrowd, and in this session he's going to talk about harnessing the power of Archicad. I always want to have presentations as part of my events that are focused on the way in which a template or your template actually sets you up for the road to success. And for me, having another person, it's always good to have diversity in terms of, I like to have different experts present on templates at each of these events so that the attendees get differences of opinion. It doesn't just become a one-sided affair where one person talks about templates in all the events. So I look forward to seeing what Tony has to say on templates and look forward to the questions you have after it. So take it away, Tony.
Hi Nathan, thanks for the introduction. Pleasure to be here and kicking off Archi Intensive 2023. Looking forward to a great day of learning. So my presentation is on called Harnessing the Power of BIM. So making your Archicad template work for you. About me, my name's Tony Fitzpatrick. I'm an architectural designer based in Blenheim, New Zealand at the moment. I've been using Archicad since 1999, been working for myself since about 1993 up to 2015, before I headed off to Finland and worked for AW2 Architects for the last 7 years. 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now, we started up the BIMcrowd, a specialist BIM outsourcing company, and have worked with that on the side until last November, and now full-time based back here in New Zealand. So what I want to show you today, or what I want you, well, hopefully you will learn from today, is to firstly discover how Archicad can actually help you automate more of your work. We seem to often use Archicad as a modelling tool, and then do everything else quite manually, focusing on 2D documentation and some visuals and stuff like that, but forgetting about how we can really use the power of BIM from Archicad. To do that, I want to show you how expressions can help and how they can be used to actually extract data from the model, which will help you in the design process and to manage the BIM model. And then lastly, how you can tie expressions and graphic overrides together to provide all sorts of quality assurance assets, schedules and views, things like that. And also how you can use those expressions to create schedules and tables that you can use in your Archicad output. So I'm going to break this down into two parts. So firstly, we'll go through a presentation just to show you the sort of the strategy and the thinking behind how I've set up our templates and how we want to use them. And then the second part will be more showing you some real life examples of how we've set it up and how we extract the data and how we manage it from there. So a traditional template is quite often 2D centric. So it's about getting the model built and then extracting the drawings from the model as quickly as possible, so that we can output those in generally PDF format, maybe DWGs for exporting to other systems. We quite often have some schedules in there for checking some things, but usually they're quite often quite basic. And we tend to use the out-of-the-box materials and surfaces and properties. So we just, Archicad comes, we open it up, we do a little bit of customization, how we want the drawings to work, how we want the layers working maybe, the view sets, how we label our drawings and label our layouts. We customize all those sorts of things. But a lot of it is still Archicad out of the box. And we hear it when I was doing the template at AW2 over the last year or so, when we sat down to start the process, basically the instructions that we got given from the head architects were, I want beautiful pen sets so we can produce beautiful drawings. So that sort of actually got me thinking about, what purpose did our Archicad template play in our role as architects? Was it just something for producing drawings, and was our role, just to produce drawings, or do we want it for something more? Is our role something bigger than just producing drawings? Like, is it making buildings and making buildings work, and making the construction process as efficient as we can as designers? The other thing that sort of I addressed while working through this template redesign was the actual architectural process. Now, I found as a foreigner, especially working in an office in a foreign land in a strange language, that finding information about a project was difficult. And so one of the goals I had with our template was to actually bring all of the information into a place where we could actually find it and where it could be accessible, and so that we weren't spending a lot of time trying to confirm what something was while we were working, so we could just carry on and get our job done and get the project through as quick as we can. So the typical architectural process is quite drawing focused. You always hear architects telling us, draw this, draw that. There's never any model this, model that. It's all about the 2D output. The information is quite often dispersed. It comes in emails, it's in notebooks, it's in team chats, it's in the project architect's head. There's probably a conversation on WhatsApp. There's numerous places where little pieces of data for a project come in, are stored, and then quite often lost. And so when you want to know what's gone on, or what status of a particular element or item or material is part of the building, often a case of hunting through email threads and trying to find the thread that mentioned it, or where you confirmed it, or going back through a Teams chat and trying to find out who were you speaking to? Was it in a group chat? Was it in an individual chat? Who told you this, what the answer was? So this was something that I thought we really needed to be able to try and manage within Archicad to make all that easy. So you could come into Archicad, open the file, and understand exactly how well developed or where the project was at. And also, the other thing we find when we're trying to improve processes in an architectural office is that there's too little time to do it the smart way. So the default method is always the long way. Seen many architects or technicians working on projects, counting things and putting it in Excel spreadsheets and then sending the spreadsheets to someone, and then you sit down and you ask them, what happens when you change the quantity of that item, and how do you manage that? Oh, well, I just have to count them again and put them back in the spreadsheet and send it away. So all this sort of stuff is things that I think we can do away with a really smart Archicad template. And the other sort of statement we would quite often hear from our architects is, we're architects, we don't do BIM. So BIM's quite often seen by architects, not all of them, but it seems to be a lot, that BIM is something extra to architecture. So we do architecture and then we do BIM, rather than using BIM as the way to empower our architecture and to empower the design process. So they're all sort of the basic concepts of what I've tried to encompass in our template. So how can we BIM better as a start? So how do we start the process to do better BIM, to enable us to use BIM as a tool that informs us of the design and during the design process? So first of all, I think is to start thinking in terms of modelling. We always hear, as I said before, draw this, draw that. There's never a reference to modelling. So I think it's time we need to sort of change the thought process from drawing to modelling. So let's focus on the modelling. As long as we've got everything set up well in the background, the drawings will take care of themselves to a great extent. I mean, we're not going to get them 100% perfect out of the model, but if we model well, we'll get a lot of what we want out of that into the drawings, and then we just have to touch them up. The second one is to use the model to inform the design process. So let's put the information into the model. So let's not just build a model that we use for producing the 2D drawings, but let's get the information in there, the data that we need, the data that we know, so that anyone can jump into the project and see what is happening and understand the building a lot better, a lot quicker. And thirdly, try and automate whatever we can. And this doesn't have to be highly technical, Python scripting and APIs and all this sort of stuff. It's as simple as having everything set up the way you need it to be, and the information being extracted from the model because you're modeling in the correct way, and then populating schedules and drawings and whatever else we need along the way. So I sort of set out with the design of our template with three core tenets, really, of what our Archicad BIM template would do. First one is that the Archicad file would be our primary data repository for the project. So whatever data we had available on the project should be accessible in Archicad the moment it becomes available. So that's things, down to things like materials, the exact materials we're using when we know what they are, the surface materials, the finishes, once we've made a decision on a supplier or a color or a brand or whatever, we should be able to tell what that is easily within Archicad. And it shouldn't be something that we actually are putting in all of the time for every element, which also opens the door for errors. So we should have a place where we can manage that sort of information, and then it gets pulled through the project as we work and develop the building. The second one was that the project file should be used to analyze the basic requirements and automate basic tasks. So we could be checking for things along the way that are simple enough to do in Archicad with the right expressions and graphic overrides along the way. So I know there's programs like Celebri and BIM Collab Zoom that we can export files to and then run some sort of checks on them. But if we can do that in Archicad as we're working through the process, it just saves time. It saves the need for actually having to deal with another piece of software, and it saves the hassle of the time, converting it to IFC, exporting it to Celebri, opening in Celebri, doing the checks, coming back and fixing whatever you need to be fixed. So this is a case of using Archicad to do whatever we can do in Archicad before we need to go externally. And the third one was to eliminate and reduce free data entry. So by that I mean we don't want people typing in data, especially repetitive data. So like room names, where you've got a big project and you've got 50 of one type and 20 of another type and 30 of another type of rooms with the same basic name, or that you would label them the same. We should be pulling that information out of a list to reduce the possibility of data mismatches. So like if you've got a big team working on a project, you might have one team working on the ground floor, another team working on the second floor, and another team working on the third floor of a building. And just for example, they're labeling the bathrooms and the toilets. So, the ground floor team could be labeling their toilets with a capital W and a capital C. The second story could be labeling them with a capital W and a small c. And the third story could be labeling them, say, with small letters, small w and a small c. Now, when we take all that information and put it into a schedule in Archicad, it sees each reference type as a different element. So rather than there being, say, 100 WCs, it'll tell us that there's 30 that are spelt with a capital W and a capital C, and there's 30 spelt with a little w and a little c, and the rest are all spelt with a big W and a little c. So then someone has to go through and fix all of that up. So it's, these can be also handled with, standards at the start, but when people come into a project, it's very easy for them to not understand what the rules are and naming conventions and things like that. So by using option sets in the properties, we can eliminate all of those friction points along the way, especially with naming elements, and then trying to reconcile them later on in the project. So how are we going to use Archicad as our primary data repository? First of all, I looked at smart naming of material. So that was a case of not just using the standard Archicad naming convention. It might be glass, or it might be blue paint or something like that. It's renaming the materials or developing materials with names that include a number of data points within the name. So the first data point that, and this is just the way that I've dealt with it, there's all sorts of ways you could deal with it. So in my example, you'll see that the first data point is a code to distinguish that material. The second data point is a description of what the material is. The third data point is the brand, the supplier. And then the fourth data point is the actual code for the color. So what that allows us to do is evolve the information that goes into the materials as the project evolves. And it also allows us to extract parts of that name out and use in different areas. So maybe during the concept design phase, we might only want to know what the code is and what the description of that material is. So, WO1 might be, a wall that's painted white. But later on in the project, as we want to put more information in, we come to the construction phase, or the develop design phase. We might want to know both the code and the description, but we also want to be specifying the brand and the actual color of the material. So that can all happen just automatically without any real work needing to be done on the user's end when it comes to moving to the next stage of the project. So like in our conventional type of project, we would have had to be going into elements and adding that data manually. The wall surface color or whatever, we're quite often adding that into every wall that's white, and every wall that's green, and every wall that's timber. So we would tell it what it is. So by using the materials, all we have to do is get our 3D representation correct, and then we can extract that data out of the materials themselves. The second thing would be, in our strategy, is to start with less. So rather than having a materials palette that covers every possibility, we went with a strategy of actually saying, well, hold on, what if we only had the minimum amount of materials that we needed, and they were all white, basically. So we start off with a whole lot of white materials. We start giving them a code. So we would be like, wall 1, or wall surface 1, wall surface 2, ceiling 1, ceiling 2, roof 1, roof 2 if there's more than 2 roof colors, floor 1, 2, 3, whatever, how many floor surface finishes we're going to have. And then we would build them up from there. So as the at the very early stage, we might know is that one wall is going to be a different color than another wall. So we will call one wall 1 and one wall surface 2, and they'll both be white until such time as we know that one's going to be grey and the other one's going to have some tiles on it. So then we would start putting more information into the wall material itself, or into the surface material itself, rather than into every wall itself. So once we realise that wall 1 and decide that it's going to be grey paint, say, we would then say in the material name that WO1 is grey paint. But at this stage we don't know the brand or the actual colour, so we would leave that with just the standard tag of designer and colour, or whatever the default label you would use there. And then later on, as we decide that wall's going to be resine paint, we would then add that to the name of the material. And then once we decide on the paint code, I don't know if it's I haven't seen resine schedule for a while, but if it's charcoal grey, say, we would then add charcoal grey to the colour component of the material name, or if we're working in Europe or whatever, we would give it the colour code that they use over there. So then our material has evolved to give us all the information, and it's attached to the wall without us having to do anything other than assign the material to that wall. So it's sort of one action from the designer, and it takes care of everything else. And then the last thing is, as I said, as I've explained before, is evolve the data as the project grows. So as the name grows, we would also look to add the colours and the textures and stuff to that material as we developed it. So when you come into a project as a new member of the team, and you start looking at things, you'll know that those walls are white, but the material says that it's grey. So obviously we know what material we're using, but we haven't decided on the exact shade or colour or whatever. So you can get a better understanding of the developedness of the design, and you're not constantly having to ask someone what's happening here, what colour is this, what colour is that. And the other thing that it saves is some projects that I worked on was where we've gone through, we've put all the different materials on the exterior of the building, and then someone has sat down and manually gone and placed a number in each different material, and then they've written out a schedule on the side with the different materials and their descriptions, and then every time it changes they have to do that on every page that it's on and every elevation and stuff like that. So with this sort of technique, it means that sort of stuff happens instantly. So you change the material, you change some information, it gets put through to the drawings straight away, assuming that they're on auto update. The next stage, or the next tenet, is to inform the design process. So we want to be able to use our model to extract useful data that we can use in a decision-making process. So, nowadays sustainability and things like that are a big issue, and the carbon, embodied carbon, and things like that. So we want to be able to extract that data from the model as we go, rather than someone saying, "Oh, I need this information," and then having to work out how we can do it. So if we can have a lot of properties set up using expressions, as I said before, we extract the data and then we can use it to inform the design process. So once you've got all your properties set up and tied up to the relevant elements that you want to use them for, we can then set up graphic overrides for checking whatever it is that you want to check. And with these combinations, the mind is it's endless. You can, whatever you can think of, there'd be some way of being able to come up with a solution with a combination of properties and graphic overrides. And then thirdly in this part is to use the power of the schedule. So there's so much information we can be extracting from the Archicad model that we can then be using for in the decision making process. The most simple one nowadays, as I said, was your embodied carbon and life cycle analysis and those sorts of things. And we can extract that data and we can put it into other data analysis programs like Power BI, and then we can start doing all sorts of magical things with that data to analyze the building and work out where things are and what the big contributors are to costs or embodied carbon or how much where all the exterior cladding is, how much exterior cladding, how much glass there is, how much of it's being used to collect sunshine and how much is being used just to for the view and things like that. We can just do all sorts of things. So, and then the last one of these was to eliminate free data entry. As I said, people just entering data ends up with lots of different versions of the same thing, which when you're in a hurry wanting to extract some information is always a pain that you've got to sit down and try and fix it all up. So a lot of this especially comes from the principle that we didn't want the BIM manager to be the guy who fixed all the problems. We saw the BIM manager's role as guiding the design process or guiding the modeling process, the digital aspects of the project. So by eliminating all those friction points, that means then the BIM manager can concentrate on creating a great model rather than fighting fires all the time and fixing up everyone's mistakes. Because you could be sure as houses that if you've got more than two people working on inputting the same sort of data, there are going to be mistakes, even if it's just a simple spelling mistake or a capitalization mistake. They happen. And then secondly, we created some expressions that then split the entries with multiple data bits. So when we were setting up the option sets for these properties, if it was like for furniture, we would have a two-part expression. So one part would be the short code. So maybe if it was a chair, it would be like, say, CH for chair, and then there would be another part to that name, which would be the full name. So it would be a chair, or T for table, and then table. So then we use expressions to split those up into two parts. So one part being the short code and the other part being the long name, so that we can then use those bits of data in different places. So like if we are doing a floor plan or an elevation where we want to label all the elements, we can then say just pull out the short code and label all the sanitary fittings, and bang, all the sanitary fittings get a label put in the right place that relates to what it is. And then on the side of the drawing, we can create a schedule that then just says, in one column, place the short code, and in the other column, place a description, so that then we can have a key to what all the short codes are in the drawing. Again, a process which is very time consuming on a conventional project where we're doing that manually, and then when we decide to add something, we have to go in and adjust the schedule and make sure it all fits and everything like that. So just again, saving something that's really unnecessary to be doing as an architect. And then the last part there is to harness the power of the schedules to create legends and keys. So as I explained before, you choose the information, you place it on the right element, and all the keys and the legends just basically take care of themselves and populate themselves to the level of detail that's needed at the various stages of the project. Okay, so here we're going to take a look at the surface materials and how we've set these up. So what we've got here is a range of white materials, all with a different name relating to different parts of the building or different surfaces. So wall materials, floor materials, ceiling materials, glass, furniture materials. And then they have a naming structure which is made up of 4 distinct parts. So this is an exterior material, and we've got a code which we've come up as SP-U00. And then the 4 parts, we've just got the material description, the brand, and the color. So what we would do is we would create the amount of materials that we have or that we're planning to use in the project. So if we're going to have an exterior facade which has got 3 or 4 different materials, we'll create 3 or 4 different materials which basically are all duplicated, except for the code will have a different number at the end of it, and they'll all be white, and they'll all have no surface color or no texture and no fill, cover fill. And then as we go through the project, we'll start populating this information as we make those decisions. So once we decide that SPU01 is going to be say a red brick, we'll come in here and we'll change that part of the description, and we'll say it's going to be a red brick veneer. At this stage we don't know who the supplier will be or what actual color it will be, but we're going to go with a red. And then at this point we could also then start adjusting our surface colors and giving it a surface color that we want to have on it. A bit more red. And we could put the cover fill, and we could even choose a texture if we wanted one at this stage, but maybe we're waiting till we know the exact one and we can add the exact texture later. And then as we work through the project and we discover, we'll decide who we're going to use for the bricks, and we might choose here that this is a Monia brick. So we just enter that in here in the material description and leave it at that, and then that actually then goes through the whole project. So anywhere we've assigned that material, we know that that's a Monia red brick veneer. The only thing we don't know at this stage of the project is what actual color code it is, but we'll use we can add that later on, and we just repeat this for all the materials that we're going to use. And so we do the same for the composites. So again, we've set these up, similar sort of naming structure, but here it's only got 3 parts, a code, a fire rating, and an acoustic rating. We've left the actual numbers as X's, so until we've decided those points, or until we've been told what they are by the engineers, they remain as X's to indicate that they're undecided. And then as we decide those, we put them in here, and then that carries through everything that we do in the project later on. So then once we've got these naming systems in place, well, then we can come into our properties and we can set up some expressions to then sort of extract information out of those names, and then we can start using that information for various things. So just go to the wall one. Where are we? Surface materials. So here's a property that is going to generate the material type shortcode for all exterior surfaces. So we tell it that it's an expression, and then we've got the expression down here which is going to look for the top surface of a slab. It's going to split that at the colon and take the first part of that text and return the result. we've also got various other equations down here, or expressions down here, which are looking for the same result but from different types of material. So different types of elements. So every different type of element we need a different expression for, because these are calling them from the standard Archicad parameters for those elements. So Archicad basically just goes through this list until it finds one of these expressions that relate to the type of element that it is you are trying to get this code for. A thing to remember with properties is actually just make sure that you don't tick the all box when you're assigning them to classifications. It might seem simple, might seem the easiest option. Believe me, it creates more hassle than it's worth down the track. So choose the custom one and then come in here, edit, and only choose the actual properties that you want the actual classifications that you want that property to be assigned to. What that does is it means that when someone jumps in the project and they go and open up a wall or a floor or whatever it is, that it doesn't give them a huge list of properties, half of which are irrelevant, and then get confused and not enter any information into the property. So then your properties become worthless. So at least if you assign your properties carefully to the right classifications, you then know that all your properties that are assigned to an element are actually valuable and do something in the project. So if we then go up and look at the option sets properties, so these are the properties that we've created which reduce the need for free data entry. So basically we looked at our projects and said, right, what's the sort of information that we're constantly repeating? If we're always repeating something, then we're going to put it in an option set, and then that means we reduce the opportunity for errors in entering that data, and we get a consistent output. What it also has allowed us to do is to add some guidance into the project. So the first property that we put on the list in an option set, or the first option, is the stage of the project where that property is relevant. So whether it's a concept design stage, whether it's the develop design or the construction drawings, the default text is not undefined, it lists the stage of the property. So you can go through your properties when you place an element and then actually see which ones you need to be addressing now or which ones you need to address later. And then we'll have a list of properties, usually with a short code and then a description, so that we can use these in our schedules and keys later on. So we can put the short code on our drawings quickly, and then quickly create a schedule. It will be created there by default. It will be sitting on the side of the drawings and populate as we add options to our drawing. We can also do some calculations and stuff through these properties and expressions. For instance, here we can check the wall for for its fire rating properties. So this is going to look at the wall structure, so the composite type, split it out, take the second one, and check a few things in here and return a result for us. Now these all look rather complicated, and they can be at times, but they generally are as simple as a Excel formula. So you start off simple and work your way up. So find something that you could do with your expression, and then build your way up until you get into these more complicated expressions like this, which are checking things and splitting things and converting strings to numbers and comparing it to is it above zero, basically, to return a result. So you can run true false operations on elements. You can do mathematical functions on elements, logical functions. So if something meets a certain criteria, it will then return this result. If not, return this result. Or if something is this or that, do this. Those sorts of equations. Mathematical functions, so sums and square roots and all those sorts of things. Some useful rounding functions here if you want to just round numbers to a certain decimal percentage or decimal places, or whether you want to round them to certain modules or multiples, all those sorts of things. You can do some trigonometrical functions. You can carry out statistical functions, some text editing, so we can split text off, we can convert things to lowercase or uppercase, we can concatenate text elements, so join them together to make bigger strings of text. And then we can convert data from text to numerical, so that we can use, say, a text result in a mathematical equation, or vice versa, take a mathematical result and put it into a text string. You can also operate properties or expressions on other properties, so you can sort of like work your way up to creating a complicated expression. So take some information, extract the data, and then give that as a result for one property, and then create another property and use an expression that then says, take that result and check it against something else and return me a result for that. And then as you develop your expressions familiarity, you can then sort of start saying, well, actually, I could actually combine those two into one property and one expression and get rid of the double up. But those things take time, and best just to start somewhere and try and get them into your project to help you out. So if we sort of take a look at, say, a live project here and see something that we've done, here is a composites. So we've created quite a complicated composite name here, comprising of the wall construction type, the framing, the insulation, the exterior cladding, and the interior lining type. This is just a house, so we weren't worried so much about fire rating and stuff. And then we've used graphic overrides to turn each type of wall a different color. And so then we can come in here and we can go to our plan. We can see by color. We can go back up here and see what that wall is. And pink wall, so this is WA14, 90 by 45, 600 centers for the studs, green stuff, R2.5 insulation, 10mm plasterboard each side. So that's all then produced automatically by Archicad. We haven't had to manually type out the schedule. We haven't had to put any fills over the walls or all those time-consuming things. And then if we change anything through the project, it changes automatic. And this is the beauty of a lot of using these properties and expressions and stuff like that, is that once you change something, as often happens during the design process, it then carries through the whole project and updates all your drawings and your schedules and your lists and everything that you've got set up. So yeah, hopefully that is a good brief introduction to expressions and the power of expressions and how they can help you, and properties themselves, and how they can help you manage your Archicad project. How you can use your Archicad model as a real BIM model, so that you're using the data within that model to make informed decisions. So yeah, if you need to discuss it anymore or want to know more about it, feel free to contact me. If you're in New Zealand, there's my phone number there. Otherwise, email me or go and visit our website, www.thebimcrowd.com. There is a contact sheet there as well, so you can go and contact us through there. So yeah, that's all from me for today. Thank you for your time, and back to you, Nathan.